she's here. She's coming. She'll be here. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Blessed Sacrament Parish. If we could all find our seats, and there's more people shuffling in. And can everyone see the pictures up front? Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think there's a few of us who are blown away with the number of people that have shown up today. And if it's okay with you, I would love to start off the night with a prayer. And we'd like to invite Father Andy to do us this honor. So Father Andy is a diocesan preacher, and his preaching is powerful. Always in this current day and culture. Dominican. Apologize. There's so many words on my mind right now, and I'm still blown away with the number of people who are here. Oh my goodness. So Father Andy, please start us off with a prayer.
Yeah, don't make me something like Father Rick back there. We do have another one for you if you're ready. Yes. Thank you for welcome to Blessed Sacrament if you've never been here before. We've been here 100 years, and we're happy to host this most important event as we continue this fight. And this fight always begins and ends with our calling out to God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come together this evening to tend to your children, to defend your children, and to guide all of those who are involved in this most heinous crime to repentance, and for us to work together to end the scourge on your children, humanity. And so we bless the speakers here this evening and bless all hearts that continue to do this work that begins with prayer to do your holy will. For we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
And for those of you who have not perhaps confessed in some time, that is Father Andy's purpose in life is to serve God. And there is a purification and a cleansing of the soul. I can attest to that myself as sinners. And it's amazing how light I feel as soon as I confess. So Father Andy's right here at Blessed Sacrament. With that said, I've been praying about tonight and how I was going to open up this evening. And, as Christians we're told, focus on the truth. Focus on good. Focus on beauty. Those are beautiful sentiments, to focus on truth, what's good, and beauty. And seeking truth. And there's a bunch of us truthers in here. And in a day of so much division, separation, the divide and conquer in our society, there's no labels. This is not a political issue in any way. This is a good versus evil. This is a God versus Satan. We're in a spiritual warfare. And I'm blown away, again, with all of you here. Obviously, you are people of goodwill. You have heard about current-day slavery. Current-day slavery exists. And as you will hear from our speakers, it's a $150 billion industry. Current-day slavery, why is it not more well-known? And this is where there's going to be events all around the Madison area and in Dane County, all of Wisconsin. Because what you hear tonight with facts and with the knowledge and with the education, you can share in the ripples of this knowledge to others. And it's so important because sometimes as Christians, and in a day of so much fear-mongering out there, right? And I don't know about you, but I have seen a lot of people, all of us, have been through a great deal of trauma in the last 2.5 years. Anybody else been feeling it? There are those that have been in massive suffering. Have you heard their wails, their cries for help? Have you heard of these individuals? Because it's there. It's all around you. And after tonight, we ask you, or actually right now, I ask you to not only open up your minds, but especially your hearts. Because there are individuals in this parish, in this beautiful sanctuary, in this church tonight, that need healing. I know, because I know some of your stories, and some of you, I don't know your stories. But that's the journey called life. It's part of human condition, is to heal. And as Christians, we're being called to help those that need help. And the souls of our children right now are at hand. So without any further ado, I want to introduce to you our first speaker. And for those of you who do not know, Dave Mahoney. Oh, my goodness. He's been in the trenches. He's the former sheriff of Dane County for 15 years. But he's been in the trenches in Vice. So the stories you will hear tonight are quite compelling. And every time I hear him speak, there's always more things that I learn from you, Dave. So 41 years of being in the trenches, he knows the spiritual warfare, he knows evil. So I would love for you to welcome Dave Mahoney up to the podium.
Well, Susan, thank you very much. Father, thank you for opening up Blessed Sacrament for this information gathering tonight. To overcome this scourge of human trafficking takes a willingness to become informed. And my objective tonight is to share with you some information, real-time information occurring right here in our great county. Because through awareness, we can intervene, and with God's help, we can end this scourge all across our world. I want to start with a story. As Susan said, when I retired in May of 21, I concluded 41 years of law enforcement. 40 of those with the Dane County Sheriff's Office, and as Susan touched on, the last 15 as your Dane County Sheriff. And by far, that last 15 years was the greatest gift, honor, and privilege that the citizens of this great county gave me. An opportunity to lead very dedicated, the most dedicated men and women of law enforcement. But I want to begin with a story. From 1985 to 1994, I served as a detective in the sheriff's office. And I remember a case which occurred in the hunting Goose Lake conservation area between Deerfield and Marshall. A couple of hunters were out and came upon a young female body. A young female body that, when recovered by the coroner and by the sheriff's office, had no teeth and had her fingertips on all 10 fingers removed. Clearly in an attempt to dissuade any ability to identify this young girl. As the investigation continued, we struggled as an organization, as an agency, to gather information on this young girl because she was not missing from the Dane County area. But through divine intervention, 2 hunters in Waukesha County were out raccoon hunting. on a pair of railroad tracks underneath I-94. And they came upon 10 fingertips. It had obviously been discarded by the individual responsible for this murder. And through techniques at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, we were able to identify this young girl. And as the investigation unfolded, we learned that she had been a runaway from Chicago, had been taken in by a human trafficker who chained her in their basement while she was being trafficked and used as a commodity until that commodity was no longer needed. At which time, as I mentioned, her body was disgraced and she was discarded on the side of the road. That is the story of human trafficking. So I'll begin with the basics. What's the definition of human trafficking? It's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain forced labor or sexual acts without the permission of the individual involved or the victim. The following methods to lure victims into trafficking include violence, not only against the individual, but oftentimes with our young people. It's violence, threatened violence against their families that are used to coerce them into human trafficking. Manipulation of different fashions, false promises of jobs or helping to pay off debt, or oftentimes to feed a drug habit. Offers of romantic relationships are most prevalent among our young boys and young girls, perpetrated through social media. How many individuals? Current numbers place millions of men, women, boys, and girls are trafficked worldwide, including the second largest venue of human trafficking, and that's the United States. Worldwide. Worldwide. In Wisconsin, there has been and still are cases of human trafficking in every one of our 72 counties. Every one of our counties. How prevalent? The Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is the federal agency charged with gathering this data. The United States, as I said, is ranked in the second position for the preponderance of human trafficking worldwide, with over 199 active cases, 199,000 active cases within the United States. Of that 199,000, the Madison Police Department reports over 200 active human trafficking cases in the city of Madison currently. Over 200 active cases. The most prevalent of our 50 states, and it surprised me a little bit, but Mississippi leads our country in human trafficking with 6.32 cases per 100,000 individuals. Nevada, which I thought might be a little bit higher, came in number 2 at 5.77 per 100,000. California, 3.32. New York, 2.02 per 100,000. I was born and raised in Fargo, North Dakota. But North Dakota even beat out Wisconsin with 2.59 per 100,000. Wisconsin, current numbers, ranks at 1.63 per 100,000. So with 6 million residents of the state of Wisconsin, how many victims of human trafficking exist today? Due to the nature of human trafficking and the impact of the pandemic, the Bureau of Justice Statistics has indicated that there has been a 90% increase in human trafficking cases within the United States over the past 2 years. So the more we isolated people as a result of the pandemic, the greater increase in human trafficking occurred. And I believe and understand why. With the emergent reliance upon social media, Zoom meetings, other fashions of not being in the public's eye, it allowed human trafficking to increase because it's done in the shadows, not within sight of sunlight. It's done in the shadows. And your being here tonight is the first step. Susan and I and many others here tonight have been on the speaking circuit at the request of the bishop and the diocese to speak on this issue. And I was just mentioning, I think the next largest crowd we've spoken to had 15, and that included 5 of the speakers. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight to garner more information. And to those who are live streaming with us tonight, thank you for taking time on this very important topic. Because the only way we can bring the scourge of human trafficking to an end is by first awareness and then involvement. Speaking to our friends, our neighbors, our fellow parishioners, our children, our grandchildren, about the trappings that bring men, women, and our children into the trappings of human trafficking. So who's vulnerable? Well, I spoke to men, women, young boys and girls. Women and girls represent 65% of all those trafficked globally, with 90% trafficked for sexual exploitation. So 65% of those trafficked are women and girls, with 90% of all human trafficking, because it also involves other areas. Children account for over 50% of all victims, with the average age of becoming involved in human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, at 12 to 15 years of age. Traffickers of young girls have been found to be family members. I know of a case where a brother, a father, a step-parent were involved in trafficking. Romantic partners. The cases that I'm familiar with, and that of the 200 that make up the current active cases in the city of Madison, a large percentage, the largest percentage of that 200, involve young girls involved in relationships with older, and I'm not talking about 1 or 2 years, who meet that need, who often lead to intimidation and other fashions of entanglement within the human trafficking. Family acquaintances, strangers both at large and met on social media. Children are often targeted because of their vulnerability and gullibility. And unfortunately, market demand. Market demand for young victims is enormous in all of the sex trades. Where does trafficking occur? With the young people, the largest percentage become trafficked through social media. An example of a young girl I'm familiar with who related that she was very challenged in her adolescent relationship with her parents. And got on social media, met a young man. Now there was 15 years age difference. But she was lured into this belief that he cared for her emotionally. And through access to the internet and a practice known as sexting, where intimate pictures are taken, because of that perceived romantic relationship, very intimate photographs were taken and shared with this boyfriend. And shortly into that relationship, those photographs were sent back to the young lady. And it went from what she thought was a romantic relationship to one of intimidation and coercion, where she was told, now the photographs that you've just seen are going to be shared with your parents unless you meet with me, which in the first beginning stages was a hotel room where she was shared with friends and acquaintances. And this went on for months without her parents' awareness. This young girl the entire family I know, did not come from a challenged family. Matter of fact, she attended one of our own parochial schools. And by the conclusion of this intimidation, she not only was used for human trafficking among this supposed boyfriend and his acquaintances, she was sold as a commodity out of fear that her parents would become aware of that first contact. Now, the good news is she's safe today. Where does trafficking occur? Well, there's many types of trafficking. It's not just being sold into prostitution. As I touched on, it can start as innocently as a relationship on social media. It involves escort services, of which there are very many in Dane County. Massage parlors. Susan touched on, I spent, from 1985 to 1994, I spent that 9 years working just vice and narcotics in Dane County. And at that time, we had 3, and I won't even, exotic dance venues, strip clubs. Today, there are still 2 in Dane County. There were 4 massage parlors. And they didn't specialize in back rubs. They were strictly fronts for prostitution. The truck stops. And the number 1 location for our kids, the internet. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are made by perpetrators of human trafficking who take photographs on the internet and sell them. One of the cases that I remember working, so I remember a father called me. He said, I'm concerned about a magazine that I purchased and I found pictures of my daughter in. And it started with a young man, he was in his 20s, who put an ad in the paper, predominantly seeking campus college students, females. He said, for $25, I'm an emerging photographer. For $25, come and let me take pictures, and you'll be reimbursed. It started innocently for them, for the victims, but it emerged from photographs in clothing to unclothed, to those pictures being printed and sold in a magazine that was distributed across the United States. When we concluded that investigation, we had interviewed 58 UW-Madison campus students. Those are the 58 that we were aware of. That's how easy and prevalent the scourge is. Today, in Dane County, as I mentioned, there are still 2 strip clubs. Now, when I served as sheriff, I remember meeting with the town boards where these locations were located at. And, the real irony is on Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, and Christmas, those parking lots are filled with cars. But when I asked the elected officials why permits were granted for these 2 establishments, I was told it was because of the tax revenue that was generated. So for just a few pieces of gold, we allowed and continue to allow the exploitation and trafficking of women. I can tell you from working 9 years of vice and working with and talking with the victims who were in those businesses, that it wasn't for the most part, it was not a choice. They were there because they were coerced by criminal elements, gangs, or they were addicted to drugs, and it was a means to feed their addiction. Wasn't Pretty Women. If you think about the movie, it's not a career choice. It is clear and pure exploitation and using a human life as a commodity. And both are still in business today. So we asked then, how are victims lured into trafficking? I touched a little bit on addiction to meet some basic survival needs. In the case of this young girl from Milwaukee, it started out, I believe, for her, for housing. She was a runaway and needed a safe place to live, even though she was chained up in the basement of a house. Drugs, shelter, basic sustenance, food, belonging, acceptance. And oftentimes as a means to high price value items. A willingness to sell or be sold, not choosing to sell oneself, but to be forced. Once caught up in that victimization, it's very hard to escape. Whether it's the dependence of drug addiction or the fear and intimidation that occurs to the vast majority of victims of human trafficking, or fear, particularly among our young people, the fear of their actions being disclosed. And these are masters at intimidation. Masters. How else would a young 30-something offering $25 to come get your picture taken and with a young lady's 58 young co-eds pictures being distributed across the country? How do we prevent kids from being trafficked? I can tell you why I'm here. It's because of the young people who are in the audience here today, and for those who are not, who we as parents and grandparents have a responsibility to protect. But I am glad that some of you are here tonight. How do we prevent them from being trafficked? Setting up strict privacy settings and use guidelines for these technologies, whether it be phones or computers. Awareness of strange, inappropriate friend requests. Know the warning signs that I touched on. As many of us, and I would say most of us, if not all of us, know, if it's too good to be true, it isn't true. And most importantly, if we see something, if we know something, say something. Bring it to Father. Bring it to law enforcement. We all have a responsibility to care for and oversee each other. And most importantly, have that conversation, that sometimes difficult conversation beforehand. And in the end, to quell the fears of those young people who are caught up in human trafficking, who may have made a mistake. Most important, be kind. Be kind and open for the conversation. Not accepting, but be open for that conversation. Because as difficult as it is for us as a parent to hear that, it's just as difficult to bring that information forward in a loving family. I share that because that was the reason that this young girl did not disclose to her parents, for fear of letting them down. But to her surprise, when she did have that conversation, her parents were kind and open to having that conversation. Well, I used to run for office, so I can talk forever. But Susan's given me the high sign, and as I've learned over time, adhere to that message. But I hope that as we progress through this evening, that you will have questions for all of our presenters tonight. Thanks again for being here tonight. That's the first big step. And share the message. Ask questions and share the message and being involved, because it takes every one of us to be involved to bring an end.
So, a very quick synopsis. Dave, what you're saying is that it is one of the largest scourges in our society, in our backyard. It's right up there with guns and drugs, but it's far worse in many ways, right? Because a person can be exploited and used and abused more than once. Often, I've heard him speak before, 20, 30, 40 times a day. This is what we're talking about. These are our kids. These are us, people, who are being hurt. So thank you. I learned so much from you, Dave, for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm going to move right into introducing our next speaker. And I've gotten to know her in a very short period of time. She feels like a sister to me with all the stories that we've shared. And this one, I'd really like for you to open up your hearts and pray for her and her family. She's a mother, a rural mother. She has 2 beautiful daughters. You'll see pictures very soon. What's heartbreaking is that her baby was trafficked to death in Madison. That is our next speaker. And please stick around as we have questions for the speakers. Let's introduce Lisa. Come on up here.
Well, I want to thank you too, everyone, for being here today. I am very honored to be able to have the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm thrilled with this audience here today. This is, just for everyone's information, it's the first time I've actually spoken in Madison. I have done some press releases and some other things with the city and a lot of people, but I've never actually shared my story with the people of Madison, and so I'm thankful for that opportunity here today. I'm here to tell you the story of my son, Jeffrey. He was a victim of sex trafficking right here in Madison prior to his death in 2016. And before this had ever happened to our family, I was one of those people who believed that trafficking only happened in large cities and in other countries, but certainly not in a rural community of Wisconsin. Boy, was I wrong. Today you're hearing from others about what human trafficking is and what human trafficking looks like, but I'm here to show you how easy it was for my son to get caught up in the game. And I want to start, when I ever tell this story, I'd like to introduce my son to you today. See, my son Jeffrey, he was just a normal, regular kid. He was born in Alabama. We moved up to Wisconsin when he was in the 1st grade. He loved to climb trees. He had lots and lots of good friends through elementary school. But everything changed when he went to middle school. See, he was going from a really small rural school to a much larger middle school. And up in that school, he really didn't have any close friends. His best friend had moved away and really didn't have any close friends, so he did everything he could to try to fit in. He tried all different things like sports and show choir and music. He tried everything on the outside to try to fit in, from the really long skater hair, which you can see the picture, the black and white photo of my 3 children. You can see he has that long hair. He did the indie band t-shirts and the skinny jeans and the DC shoes. And then he tried everything from the complete opposite with the Hollister preppy look and the flippy Justin Bieber hair. He tried everything on the outside to find a group of friends that would be his friend and accept him into their group. And the only kids that really took him in were the kids that were making some pretty poor choices in their life. So when my son was in 6th grade, he started smoking marijuana, experimenting with cigarettes, and drinking alcohol. By the summer of his 8th grade, he met a girl. They started doing a drug which is known as Triple C. This is your over-the-counter cold, cough, and congestion medication. He would take these in quantities of 30, 40, and 60 pills at a time. Well, in 9th grade, he got in trouble, which is the picture that's on the, I'm going to go my right to left, so that'll be your left to right on the photo. So we're going to the one on this side is a photo of my son in the 9th grade. He's in the bathroom taking a selfie, which is what all teenagers do. And he was, by the 9th grade now, he is now doing prescription medications. Now, my son got a hold of prescription meds by going to someone else's house and looking in their cabinet. And I'm going to step off my trafficking box for one little second and just say this important message, that we know what's in our medicine cabinet, what's in our house, but we don't know what's in someone else's house. I guarantee you most kids are going to look in your bathroom and look and see what's there. My son would go in and he would look at a bottle, he would take one pill out, he would try it. They would experiment on how it felt, and if it felt good, he'd steal the whole bottle. And if it didn't feel good and didn't like the reaction, he'd put it back and he'd try something else. You see, I was that mom that called the mom's house and said, my son wants to spend the night, is it okay? Are you going to be home? And when I would talk to the moms, she's like, yeah, I'm going to be here all weekend, everything's good. But what my son wasn't telling me is that his parents were divorced, and they were going to leave mom's house and go to dad's house. And dad was an alcoholic. Dad was using drugs. Dad had all these things in the house that I didn't know my son had access to. So in February of my son's freshman year of high school, he got in trouble at school for having Triple C on campus. And so that day, he came home from school and he says, Mom, I've got a problem. I've been using drugs and I don't know how to stop. He's 15 years old. He's been using since he was 11 years old, and this is the first time I had any clue that something like that was happening in our house. So I took him to the emergency room and we got him chaptered, which is where two professional people say it's okay to get him into some type of facility to get more care. He was away in a hospital for 5 months. He did incredible. He went through their entire program, graduated, and I thought things were normal. I thought, you go to the doctor, they fix you, you come home, everything's better again. And it's not like that with addiction. You learn that that's something you have to live with for the rest of your life. And so when my son came home, he had to go into a day treatment facility. And in this facility, he met a young girl who was 14 years old, living in a group home. And her mom would hide her out in different hotels and homes throughout our community. And my son decided he was going to run with her because he didn't want to leave her alone. And so he started running away with this young girl. He also started using drugs again. K2, synthetic marijuana, was the drug of choice at that time. And that was what he started all over the cycle. If you'll go to the next one on the first side here. So this began a cycle of my son now running away. He has gone, starting out at 2 days at a time, would gradually go to 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks at a time that he'd be missing. Every time that he would run away, he would use heavier drugs than the time before. He would try anything and everything he could get his hands on, from meth and cocaine to LSD and heroin. Every time he'd run away, he'd use at the level he was the time before and escalate and go higher and continue to use a higher level of drugs each time he ran away. Well, eventually my son did get in trouble and went into the juvenile detention center up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was in a program there called the Core Academy, was doing wonderful. He was ready to graduate. He was actually doing so well in this program that they decided that he could walk to the local college and get his GED. And one day while he was over there, he went for a walk, asked to go to the bathroom, and disappeared. Next thing I know, he's been missing for 6 weeks when he suddenly calls me and asks me to pick him up here in Madison. If you'll go to the next one on that side. When my son, by this point, had been through several years of runaways and incidents with his addiction, then I knew it wasn't smart for us to just pick up and drive to Madison and go get him. And so I set up something with the police department and asked them to go pick up my son for me. When the police arrived at this restaurant to pick up my son told the police officer what had just happened to him. You see, my son had been missing for 6 weeks, but he felt like he'd only been gone for 2. He said that he was with these men. They'd approached him outside of a gentleman's club here in Madison. These men had come up to him and said, "We know that you're a minor, but we can get you a job making more money than you're making right here. We'll give you a place to live, food to eat, a phone, new clothes, jewelry, shoes, you name it. We'll give it to you. Oh, and we'll also give you all the drugs that you want if you come work for us." Well, being 15, 16, homeless on the streets in Madison, he decided that that was a pretty good deal. And so he went to go work for these men. Unfortunately, the work that these men were doing was trafficking. My son came home from them after telling us the story that he was forced to have sex with women. Yes, women do buy sex as well. My son was forced to have sex with these women, and when he didn't do what was asked of him, he was beaten up by these traffickers. My son came home with burn marks up and down his forearms of the branding that they did to him while he was with them. Now, because my son was in the Juvenile Detention Center in La Crosse, we placed him in the Juvenile Detention Center here in Madison. During the time that my son sat in that jail waiting for us to get the transfer to move him up closer to us, the police were investigating who these men were. Now, during the 3 days that it took the police department to figure out who these men were, and by the way, no offense to any police, they did their job. But in the 3 days it took for these men the police officers to find out who these men were with my son, these men visited my son in jail. They made phone calls to the jail. They had contact with my son all the time. After day 3, when these men, the police department figured out who these men were, we found out they were known child sex predators here in Madison. That the police knew who they were and that what they were doing, they just didn't have enough evidence to do anything about it. But they were on their tail, they were watching them. Well, in the time frame from Madison to La Crosse, when we stopped communicating with them in Madison, they turned their attention up to La Crosse. So now suddenly they are, sorry, I lost my train of thought when I was thinking about where we were in posters. Suddenly when they were hunting and trying to figure out who these men were, they found out that they were trying to get a hold of Jeffrey up there in La Crosse. So they're trying to get him up there. They're trying to get information from him. And what we thought they were trying to do is just find out when Jeffrey had court. You see, they'd paid a bail for him in Madison, which my son didn't need a bail. It was a signature bond but they wanted their money back. And so they were coming after and sending letters and making phone calls up to La Crosse. You see, really in the trafficking world, what that's called is grooming. And what they were doing is telling Jeffrey things he needed to say to the police, things you should say to your social workers and therapists. He said, "Don't worry about your mom and your sisters. They're already on our side." They were trying to convince Jeffrey that he had our permission for him to be with those people. He was telling him that they would make promises of a job or emancipation, which was illegal in the state of Wisconsin, but Jeffrey didn't know that. They would tell him how to talk to his social worker. They would say that they're going to help him get into a rehab hospital to get the help that he wanted. What they were doing is this brainwashing they were doing to convince Jeffrey that they're going to take care of him. So don't worry about anybody else in your family. We'll always be here to take care of you. Well, now nobody's paying attention to them in La Crosse or in Madison. Nobody's contacting them. They're getting angry, so then they decide to start stalking our family. They go on social media, they try to friend request my daughters and myself, and we're not responding to them. So then they go on Messenger, and they start messaging me, asking me, when is court? What's going on? Why are you not responding to me? And just constantly badgering me. And as we are not replying, they're getting angrier. And the messages that are coming across are getting a lot more verbally aggressive to us. But really what was happening in all this time, we were so focused on who these men were and what they were doing that we really forgot what Jeffrey was going through. And so that night, Jeffrey was asked to go into a room they call the chill room. This is a room that has some music. They can sit and just listen to music and chill and relax. And it has always worked in the past for him. But because we hadn't thought about what Jeffrey had just gone through emotionally, we didn't realize the help that he needed. And so Jeffrey went into that room that evening and attempted to complete suicide. We were able to get him transported to the ER. But while he was in the hospitals, the ER doctor said, "He's going to be fine. You can take him back to jail." And the jail says, "Oh no, this boy needs mental health care. He needs behavioral health. He needs to be in that hospital." And the behavioral health said, "Oh no, he's too violent for us. He needs to be back in the jail." My son was placed in an ambulance and driven around the city of La Crosse until finally the chief of police came in and said, "You're putting this boy in the mental health or behavioral health hospital." But what happened that evening is that we told my son, "Nobody cares about you." My son felt like there was nothing that anyone could do for him and help him. So he sat for a week in that hospital, and while he was in the hospital, he decided that nothing is happening quick enough, and the only people that really care about me are those traffickers. And so one day he decided to run from that hospital, and he took off running down to the nearest Walgreens. And there he asked a woman if he could borrow her phone so that he could call his mom. But you see, that day he didn't call me, he called his traffickers. Because to him, the only people that truly cared about him, because that's what these traffickers have been telling him, the only people that really care about him are them. And so instead of calling me, even though he knows that we loved him greatly and wanted the best for him, he hated to see us cry. He hated to see the hurt that he was putting us through every time he was home. And so to him, the only people that truly cared were those traffickers. So I sent the police to the traffickers' home, to a trailer park here in Madison. They went there, they found him right away. The two men were inside the house. My son was sitting on the porch with a young girl. When the police officer drives up, my son takes off running down the alley. And this time when the police officer catches my son assaults that police officer. My son is 17 years old. He's now going to sit in adult jail. So my son sits in jail until June of 2016, when suddenly the police, they call me and tell me you can take him home. And so I came down here and picked him up and brought him home. He was home with us for 9 days, and we had a fabulous 9 wonderful days together with each other. But then one day, he just up and left again. Now this time on this run, I'm hearing about him down in Iowa. I have no clue during this whole time what the draw to Iowa is. I hear once that he overdosed. A hospital calls me and tells me about that. Several times I got phone calls from juvenile shelters where he is staying. One time he meets a woman and she says, "I work at a rehab center. Can we put him in?" And I said, "Yes, let's do it." But my insurance wouldn't cover it across the border, and so I had to drive and pick him up. On the way home from that drive, he got mad at me because he wanted to use my phone to call his friends, and I wouldn't let him. So he proceeded to kick in my windshield of my car as we're driving 75 miles an hour down the interstate. It was the first time in my life that I knew I wasn't safe alone with my child. We also found out during that time that he was being sold on Craigslist. The whole time my son was in Madison, I still thought it was drugs. I thought that he was going there and selling himself and dancing in nightclubs to get money to buy more drugs. I had no idea that my son was being sold from Madison, Wisconsin to Sioux City, Iowa. It wasn't until 2 weeks before my son died that I heard again from him. And he called me and he says, "Mom, I need to come home." And I said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." And I'd called a church in Sioux City. We were working on a way for them to pick him up and get him to a bus station. And I had someone else in Madison from another place that was going to pick him up in Madison, and we were going to get him home. But on the morning of September 30th, 2016, a sheriff came to my door and informed me that my son had passed away. We found out later that it was an accidental death. It was a heroin that was laced with fentanyl in a motel here in Madison. My son was 17 years old. What I truly believe is that evening the hotel and the drugs were purchased by his traffickers. There was a young girl with him the night that he died, but she is not speaking. And I really am okay with that because I know she's being trafficked too, and she's only trying to protect herself. Well, you would think my story would end here, and it doesn't. As I was planning my son's funeral, someone came to the funeral home with an envelope. And on the outside of the envelope, it said, "These are photos for the family. Can you please give them to them? These are the last photos from the last 4 months of Jeffrey's life." So there should be the photo of him being beaten next. So in the envelope were photos of my son, obviously high, which are some of the photos you're seeing here today. There was a flash drive and photos and a whole bunch of information of different types of photos. And I think you mentioned in your talk about how traffickers will take photos of their victims so that they can say, I'm going to show this to your mom if you don't do what I say, or I'm going to take these to the police and show them you getting high to get you arrested, to get you to do the things they want to do. And one of the series of photos in there is a series of my son being beaten. You'll see in the picture, there's a man standing behind my son. His head has been cropped out of the photo. If you look very closely between his fingers, you will see a black leather strap. It is between the fingers, so it's not like you're just holding it. It is in a position of hurting someone. This photo is part of a series of them, of him being hit by this leather strap on his back. The expression on my son's face is not laughter. That is that expression of, I've just been hit, that shock feeling. In the actual photos, you can see the tears coming down his eyes. When I did my son's funeral, I did a Friday, Saturday funeral, and Friday was the visitation. And at the visitation, the social worker had asked me if she could bring several kids through, and I said that was fine. And on her 4th time through, she came alone, and I kind of laughed, and I said, "Oh, it's your turn to come by yourself." And she looked at me and gave me a hug and whispered in my ear, "He's on his way." I said, "Who's on his way?" And she said, "The trafficker." She says, "But don't worry, we will stop him. We have police outside. They won't get in the building." You see, I already had police present at my son's funeral because I was afraid some kids would come under the influence of drugs and cause a scene. And so I already had police driving around and inside the funeral home. But not 5 minutes after the social worker walked out, in walks this man. Now, if I hadn't known who he was because he stalked me on social media, I would have said he was an attractive man. He was in a 3-piece suit, slender man, salt and pepper hair. He was an attractive 50-something-year-old man. And he walked in there with a beautiful young woman on his arm, about 20 years old. And she was crying profusely, and instantly I knew exactly who he was. And he walked right up to me and shook my hand, and he said, "Hi, I'm Jeffrey's friend from Madison." And I knew instantly. He stepped away to walk over and pay his respects to the casket, and I looked at my daughter, and I said, "That's him." And so she went and got the funeral director. He came up and he says, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "If he stands there and pays his respects and walks out and causes no scene whatsoever, he can just leave, and just make sure he leaves." And I said, "And if he doesn't, then we'll escort him out." And as soon as I got that out of my mouth, he sat down and started watching the slideshow we had going. And I said, "Nope, that's not acceptable." He walked up to the man and he said, "You're not welcome here. You'll need to leave." He got up and left respectfully. The police made sure he was escorted all the way to the highway. Then on Saturday, as I was doing the actual service for the funeral, and I was very into what was going on and not really paying attention to who was seated behind me. It wasn't until we got out to the cemetery and all the people are out there, and it's at the part of the service where it's over and it's time for the family to maybe get into the vehicles and leave. And my daughter elbows me and she says, "Mom, look over there." And over there is this man here, this man who is beating my son. But I didn't know that at the time because I hadn't seen these photos yet. But that man was standing there and he had a young boy with him. He was probably about 15 years old. And he had his arm around him here, and his other arm was holding his forearm. And in that moment when I looked at him, my gut told me, he's telling that boy, "This is going to be you if you don't do what we want you to do." And I lost it. I fell apart. I started crying. And then as I was crying, my daughter hits me again and she says, "Mom, look out there." And there's a sea of hundreds and hundreds of kids that are my son's friends out there to pay their respects. But in the middle of that group of people is a man that I used to call my son's friend. Now I've learned in the trafficking world, it's a word called the bottom, the most trusted worker of theirs, that they trust the most. And that was the person that would let my son call home, the person that would make promises to my son of a job or a place to stay. But out there in that sea of people was that man standing there staring at me. And I swear to you, he didn't blink once. He just stood there and stared right at me. And that's when I completely fell apart. That was that ugly crying. You can't get any words out edgewise. Nobody could understand what I was saying. And as I was crying, my family was thinking that I was crying so hard because I didn't want to put my son in the ground. But the truth is, in that very moment was the moment I made the decision that I am never going to let these men have access to my son again, and I'm never going to let another family go through what our family has gone through. You can go to the Christmas one. So I tell my story here today not because I want to share another sad story with you. I share my story because I do not want another person to ever have to go through what my family and what our son has been through. In order for me to cope and handle my anger through this, I've always had my faith, but I also chose that it was important to educate myself and to learn as much as I could about human trafficking. One of the good things of President Obama's reign was he created a new law called the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act of 2014. In this law, it states that any person who is a runaway or at risk is to be screened and identified as a potential victim of human trafficking. We must, as a country, provide services up to 26 years old. It must be reported to law enforcement's U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Missing and Exploited Children website. Protocols must be set in place to protect these juveniles, and their photo and their information must be reported within 8 hours locally and 24 hours nationally when families report them missing. None of this was done for my son. My son was 17 years old. A huge part of me believes that he would still be alive if someone would have helped me to understand what he was going through so we could have dealt with this better. Now, my story is unique. You probably don't hear too often about the boys who are being trafficked. We do hear about the girls a lot. And some numbers came in. Now we are really seeing, it used to be an 80-20 split. It's now like a 60-40 split of 60% female and 40% male. Lumped into that male is the LGBTQ community that's getting lumped into there as well. But no matter what, those numbers are on a rise. But it's also a perspective of a parent. It is so important to me when I go out and to speak to let you know that I'm just a normal, regular family. It's not just the broken and hurting and addicted families and those that have abuse problems. It's not just the families that had kids in the foster system or adopted or group homes. It's normal, regular, everyday people. I pray a lot, but I pray that no parent ever has to blindly go through a situation like ours. I have worked with some really fabulous partners on some trainings and information to kind of help. Because when I navigated all of this and had to go through this, there was nothing out there. There was definitely nothing out there for for parents. There is nothing out there for boys, and so I went out and tried to create these. So I work with Convergence Resource Center in Milwaukee. We created a program called Through the Eyes of a Parent, Walking with Loved Ones Through the Unthinkable. This is the first one in our country of any support or educational help for loved ones of trafficking victims, and we help them understand their fears. One of the greatest blessings that came out of COVID is I can virtually meet with families inside their homes all across the country. I also created a support group with the Janesville Police Department in Rock County on a human trafficking task force. and work with them. They support the entire family and do support groups. I also had the blessing to be able to work with the Wisconsin Human Trafficking Advisory Council. We have some campaign information that's out on the table outside, so if you're interested in any of that, please help yourself to any of that information. We also created a documentary film that's called It Happens Here. It's on human trafficking in Wisconsin. It is for 6th through 12th grade students, getting it in their health education classes, and a curriculum from DPI was created. This was released in March of 2020, but unfortunately, you know what else happened in 2020 of March? That was COVID. And so schools were more focused on getting how to do virtual learning and online learning with their students, that they weren't interested in new curriculum. And so now it's our job to go in and make sure that this curriculum gets put back into our schools. But these are just small steps in the right direction to help educate one another and help families heal after this trauma has bombarded their lives. I'm really so very thankful to Susan and all of you to have the opportunity to have me and us speak with you here tonight. And I really also I said the same thing you do. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I think it's so important that you take the time out of your schedule to be here with us today, because I believe that together, one person at a time, we can all make a difference. So thank you.
Wow. There's a couple things that come up, and that is the fentanyl. Fentanyl coming over our southern border to amounts where every single American dies from fentanyl. I mean, it could kill all of us. And what's worse is that your family does not have justice. The 3 traffickers are still out there. Right? Whoa! Okay, we don't have much longer here. I've got a couple of announcements. Okay. So let's start off with the announcements. Next Tuesday, Jeff, you'll be the very first comment to accurately ask for what you need next week. But Tuesday, January 24th, public hearing on sensitive crimes. Human trafficking is a sensitive crime. It's a horrendous crime. We need the public to go and speak about it, and your concerns as citizens, as parents, as grandparents. Every single one of us need to speak to our county, Madison. It's happening right here. So City County Building, 5:30. February 7th at Queen of Peace. Vicky's back there. She's done such a wonderful job in building for these events and awareness and education. February 7th, 7 p.m. at Our Lady Queen of Peace. That's where I went to school as a child. Beautiful parish. And this one, it is happening right here. I want to see your documentary. So close to It Is Happening Right Here. That is a documentary by Operation Underground Railroad. There were quite a few of us who saw it here in the theaters. Did you hear about it? It was in November. Anybody? There's a few of us that went. Shocking, and I'll tell you why it's shocking. It was shown one time, 7 p.m., Point Theater, also at Palace. One showing. This is a must-see documentary. Every single parent, every single grandparent, every mama bear, every papa bear, must see. So Blessed Sacrament, right here, we're showing it. We actually just got news. We're going to have access to it. Downstairs, 7 p.m., please save the date, February 28th, the last day of February. Right here, 7 p.m., downstairs in the Assembly Hall. Minimum of 100 people should be there. And then we want to continue to show this throughout Madison and Dane County, because it is happening right here. And without giving away what the documentary is, I don't want to shock you, but truth is shocking. Every single one of our homes, your homes, have been infiltrated. Did you know that? Your grandkids, your children, your great-grandkids. For some of you, it's through online, social media. It's through the games. People allow their children to play games online, and you have no idea that there are predators grooming your little innocent human beings. So it is happening right here, 7 p.m., February 28th. And I believe you're doing a presentation at St. Thomas Aquinas also in March, correct, Dave? Okay, we're going to build for that as well. Okay, so the next item is going to be, there's going to be a clipboard. Beautiful ladies, Anne, Toma, and Greta. So these are ladies in our initiative as well. Sorry. I'm getting over being perfect, so this is obviously a great night for that. So we're looking for individuals who have a passion for awareness, education. Do you belong to PTA clubs? Do you belong to a Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, Lions clubs, Mama Bear clubs, groups, Papa Bear groups, men's groups, women's groups, and you want to put on an event? We have a lineup of speakers. Lisa, Dave Mahoney. Through the diocese, we have a lineup of speakers who are ready to go. So please fill out your information, and somebody from the REACH group, and you'll know what that's about here in another minute, will reach out to you. Okay? Yes. So the clipboards, 2 on each side, right, will be going around. Now, is there anybody who does not have one of these sheets? Should have gotten one at the very beginning of the night? Oh, there's a couple. Okay, in the back there. Anybody else? Couple over here. We ran out. Okay, next time we need to bring more. Is there any extras that? Okay, there's a couple back there that need, and then I think there's a couple more on that seat as well. Okay, what you're going to read at the very top, Initiative to Eradicate Human Trafficking. We just changed the name just recently. And I'll take a minute, if that's okay, to share with you the story and how this all happened. But my husband, Kurt, where are you? There you are. Kurt, can you stand up, honey? So this is my lighthouse. We are two very imperfect people, and I think I forgot to even say my name. So Curtis D. Welton, and my name is Susan Welton. You need a handout back there? Okay. And it's not funny, but it's interesting, because you know how the Bible says, pray for and help the orphans and widows? I'm an orphan. That's part of my story. I was adopted at the age of 7 by an amazing family here in Madison. We went to Queen of Peace. Prior to that, there was a whole lot of trauma. I don't want to get into it. There was a lot of trauma. So I know what trauma is. And I made a promise with God that I was going to do my best once I was healed. I'm still on that journey. I think a lot of us are. But I wouldn't be up here if I didn't get the healing from my amazing, unconditionally loving husband. He said he'll love me like God loves me. He is my lighthouse. And Father Andy, you've been integral. You've been instrumental in our healing and my healing. So I thank you for that. Confession works, people. Just another plug. With that said, I'm an orphan. Kurt's a widow. We're such imperfect people. But God put it on our hearts to come together. So guess what? The Bible says you're supposed to help us. So here's the Initiative to Eradicate Human Trafficking interest sheet. If you look at the groups, we're all being called as Christians. And as Christians, we're not meant to be in fear. It says, do not fear, correct? So we ask, the first group is prayer. Everyone is a member, and please do this unceasingly. Pray for the families of trafficked. Oh my gosh, pray for the initiative as well. We certainly could use it. The next group is holiness, and we're very fortunate every time we pray, because this is not our mission. This is not a Kurt Susan. This is not this parish. It is God's mission. This is God's mission. And holiness, we have a couple pastors that are leading that. Holiness. Wouldn't it be cool if holiness became trending? Wouldn't that be awesome? Holiness is trending now. Purity is trending. That's what their ministry is all about, purity and holiness. It is integral. It is essential to eradicating human trafficking. Reach, Wisconsin, there's quite a few of you in this audience. Resources, education, awareness, compassion about human trafficking. So for those of you who want to run an event, we will be reaching out to you. And we will be helping to build, because it is so important to make every single person aware in our community that we, as Christians, as believers, as warriors for Christ, we will not tolerate this in our backyard. What happens when a group of us, folks, good people, do nothing when there's so much evil? What happens? So we're asking you and we're calling you. And men, it's so wonderful to see so many men in the crowd. You have a lot of work. You are the protectors of our families. You are the protectors of our community. We need you. We need you to step up, please. Again, this is the saving the souls of our community, but our children. There's ripples here. Okay, the next one is really fun because, again, this is my opinion and Kurt's opinion. Justice and policy, making sure people who should be locked up are locked up. This is so important. Thank you. This is why we need you at the public hearing next week. We are the community. This is my home. This is your home. Let's protect our community. Justice and Policy Group, we have amazing, Anne, where's Anne, right? Amazing warriors for Christ coming together. And I'm so excited, the next time that we meet, it'll be in a couple months in the larger groups because the smaller groups are meeting and there's so much beautiful momentum. But we could really use individuals that are and have a heart for legislation, for bills and drafts. We are being told that Madison and Dane County, they're letting criminals out. Like they get a little slap on the hand. But yet if it's federally prosecuted in the state of Wisconsin, they're getting 25 years. Why? Or life, right? Yeah. But why is that? We have to speak up. We have to speak up. And of course, with any battle, and this is a spiritual battle, as we talked about, aftercare. Every battle has its wounded. The spiritual war is the biggest battle there is, so there are many wounded. And for those of you who have a passion to help those that have been trafficked and traumatized and abused, we have a St. Bikita house in Milwaukee, and it was a former convent that was repurposed and transformed into housing, and there's a chapel there as well, housing victims of trafficking. Now, Lisa and I just spoke about one for men, right, Lisa? Isn't that wonderful that now we can have one for boys? Our boys need help too. And then Marlene Sorensen from Zateo Community, she is currently developing land right now for homes for traumatized and or victimized women. So that's it. So let's just take a minute, very quickly, fill out your name, email, phone, and rank 1, 2, 3. What you're being called to. Are you being called? Yes, you are. What is your passion? What is your gifts? What are your talents? We'll be meeting again in a larger group, like I said, in a couple months. Please make sure to give us our email addresses. We'll give you a heads up when we're all going to be meeting. Okay? And with that said, can I have the speakers, can I have you two come back up here? And comments and questions, and I think the very first comment should be with Jeff Wygand. I want to make sure that accurately that I said what I need to for next week. Oh, there's a microphone coming.
Is this working?
It's on.
All right. So my name is Jeff Wigan, and I am one of the Dane County Board Supervisors. And as Susan was sharing, next Tuesday, the 24th at 5:30 p.m., there's going to be a county board meeting.
We can't hear you. Put it closer to numbers.
Closer? How's that? Is that better? Okay. Next Tuesday, the 24th at 5:30 p.m. in the City County Building, there will be a public hearing. Public hearing is going to be with the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee for all of Dane County. And at this public hearing, there's going to be a presentation from the Commission on Sensitive Crimes. That commission works on a number of issues, human trafficking being one of them. All of you are invited to come, speak, and share why you believe human trafficking is a problem that needs to be addressed by the county. And share your personal perspective, share information, share data, and educate myself and educate my peers on why this issue needs to be addressed by the county board. So that's 5:30 next Tuesday the 24th at the City County Building. If you have any questions, you can certainly see me after. Is that okay, Susan? All right.
There is a Zoom.
For over 6 years, over 4,000 attempts to report, I have been denied delivering national security breach level information about how a global trafficking crime ring is hiding people in plain sight by constantly and relentlessly erasing and replacing their official documents and data and holding us cyber captive, duplicating 10-digit phone numbers, faking and stealing phone calls in a way that has gotten me attempted murdered, attempted raped, tortured, isolated. I cannot get any advocacy. I cannot get any representation. I am 100% obstructed from even reporting this information to law enforcement, intelligence, politicians, national defense. I have tried over 4,000 times in many cities, states, and several countries, and no one will listen to me.
Without knowing, I'm just going to say, without knowing all the details or what's going on, we can talk afterwards, I think, if you want to, because I have some people that I could connect you with, if you haven't tried them yet. So, my 2 cents.
Hello. This is a question for Sheriff David Mahoney. Can you hear me? I've been living in Madison for a while. Since you were sheriff for the 15 years prior to 2021, could you kind of walk us through Rising Sun brothel right next to the Capitol? You guys knew about it in 2010, but a complaint wasn't brought until 2016. So I guess part of my question is, what happens over those 5 years where you knew that people were being trafficked at the brothel? And I guess, were there politicians involved, local or state politicians? Because that was the rumor for at least 3 years before, I heard about it, before it was actually, a complaint was filed. So could you please walk us through that? Thanks.
Well, going back to 1985, we began, and it's not the only place. Rising Sun was one of the massage parlors I referred to. But we ran undercover operations. We had cases, brought them forth, and we either didn't get prosecuted because there wasn't adequate evidence. We did stakeouts. We took photographs of individuals that entered Rising Sun, took photographs of their license plates, confronted them, and without without being able to collect the evidence, which would have been a statement by them that that's what they were engaged in, or in the case of our undercover officers that we sent in, the cases that we were able to bring forward either didn't rise to the level of prosecution, or oftentimes was the case, the activity that the undercover was asked to engage in, we weren't going to that level. You know, you had to expose yourself, you had to engage in sex before you would get the language that you needed to make a prostitution case. And so we eventually were able to get them closed down, but I thought we had, in many cases, adequate evidence to prosecute.
Is there any movies that are appropriate to give to the high schools to have for children for their education? Is there any movies? Is it working? Okay. Is there any movies that are appropriate to give to high schools to have children watch? So they're educated, because they're the victims and they need to know these avenues and what's happening and about the internet. So is there something we could provide to our high schools that would show it to the children?
Now, there's a lot of really good resources out there. I mean, certainly the film that we created, it's in 2 parts. It's built in 5 separate chapters, so it can be shown as a section of school period each day and have time for discussion afterwards, or it can be shown as like an assembly. There's also a professional version that is for an additional 35 minutes that is for teachers to watch in advance prior to the students watching it, so that they can help it through it. There's a lot. So Underground Railroad has a lot of really good stuff out there. Five Stones up out of Gaming County up north has some really good resources. So if we can try to connect you with some of that stuff, but there's a lot of really, really good resources out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the documentary, it is happening right here. That's going to be featured here on February 28th at 7 p.m. With parental supervision. I think that's a fantastic movie. So I don't know how young your children are, but I would say, even in middle school, I mean, they're seeing the evils in the world. Why not see the truth, so that you're prepared with the tools and the knowledge to be in the battle? So right here, we're showing that documentary. It is happening right here. If you look up Operation Underground Railroad, there are many other documentaries they've done previously. There's also one more plug for, is it The Sound of Freedom with Jim Caviezel, is coming out in the next couple months. Please look for that, because that is a story about Tim Ballard, who is in Operation Underground Railroad. Now, that will be widely publicized. So please keep your eye out for that as well, Sound of Freedom. Oh, and if there's any questions, you can reach me. You can just go to the contact page, or at the very bottom of my website, susanwelton.com. If you want a recording of this video, if you need that for an organization to play it, just, reach out to us, okay?
If I just want to add, if you want to see our documentary film, you can go to the website wisconsintalks.org. All the information is on the table out back, but you can actually go, Department of Children and Family has a page on human trafficking, and it's under their toolkit, and then that information there. So you can actually watch that video right online if you'd like to.
Well, we've talked a lot today about sexual trafficking. But we haven't mentioned very much about the economic trafficking of people in here either. Essentially our whole economy is based on economic slavery. That when there were actual slaves, they were housed, clothed, fed, and got at least a little bit of medical care sometimes. But anymore, for decades, the minimum wage doesn't even cover that much. And so we've been holding people in economic slavery, and I think we need to be aware of that when we're looking at our own economy, that things have to change, that for that system, that person flipping your burgers, the person in the meat packing plant, the person maybe working on a dairy farm 7 days a week, 3 times a day milking cattle, whatever. And also, I wanted to say about, in answer to a question over here, that the laws have changed a lot. So like in 1986, I know because I fled from a relationship where I was battered, and among the things that were horrible there was the presence of some of the most despicable child pornography you'd want to say. But it wasn't then illegal to possess child pornography. It was only illegal to create it. And so the laws have changed since then, so you can't really say, going back with the police department, why haven't you been doing things? I think there's a lot of things that could be done. I think there's, that the traffickers need only sit outside the high school and look for the long-faced children who are leaving the high school at the end of the day and say, oh, what is it? Why are you sad today? And then they listen. And of course, oh, well, they don't care about you like I care about you. I can see what a lovely person you are. How easy it would be. So can't the teachers, can't the guidance counselors watch for such vulnerable children who might be being approached right there on the school grounds too, and stuff like that. And I think there's just so much to this topic. It's huge. I commend you for taking it on, but, there's a lot to it.
Well, it most certainly is an enormous issue. We just talked about human trafficking, but the internet crimes against children as a worldwide scourge is exactly why the Dane County Sheriff's Office, Madison Police, Wisconsin Department of Justice all work full-time on the internet trying to identify and draw out these perpetrators of sex trafficking, whether it be human trafficking of adults or children or other crimes against children.
I think we got time for maybe 2 more. Is that all right?
What does the life of a runaway look like the first 12 hours they leave home? And what would you want former, not police officer, Sheriff Mahoney, what would you want their life to look like? If a child feels like they need to leave home, what would you want their first 12 hours to look like so that they can be safe away from an unsafe environment, whether real or perceived? And what does a typical runaway's first 12 hours look like?
If I could ever have a perfect world in the life of a runaway, I'd want there to be awareness in our community of the vulnerabilities faced by that runaway and a safe haven for that runaway to turn to. We all get caught up in our own personal lives. And that's what brings me back to if you see something or know something, say something. It's through this awareness and opening ourselves up to victims, whether it be human trafficking or crimes against children or domestic violence or any host of other crimes that create victims, having that safe haven for that individual. In the life of a runaway, oftentimes, particularly among kids, it's filled with emotions and bad decisions. And it's these perpetrators who are so good at grooming and bringing in and allowing a runaway to feel safe. That's the biggest challenge. And we are up against PhD, I don't mean from an educational standpoint, these perpetrators of crimes against our young people have a PhD in victimization. They are masters at it. That's our challenge. And, through programs, through, our decision makers, allocating resources to our law enforcement to address these issues is our first step. Those are the men and women who are on the front lines of this crime. I applaud Jeff for being here. Jeff is, I can say it now, it's one of the few county board supervisors that supports law enforcement.
We'll take one more question before Susan will wrap up for us.
So, why these three men that victimized Jeffrey, why are they still on the streets? The social worker told Lisa,